Billionaire's Son on the Brink. How a Black Maid's incredible act of love revealed a hidden truth. Josh stood in the opulent attic of his family's New York City penthouse, a place he rarely ventured. Dust motes floated in the golden sunlight seeping through the half-open window, illuminating forgotten treasures of his childhood. He was preparing to graduate from an Ivy League school, the world at his feet, yet an unsettling feeling gnawed at him. Beneath the surface of his seemingly perfect life, a storm brewed, a tempest of expectations suffocating his identity. With every passing day, the burden of legacy weighed heavier. Who was he really, beyond his father's ambitions? Rummaging through boxes, he felt an overwhelming pressure beginning to build, each find only reminding him of the life mapped out for him. Bracelets from summer camps, journals filled with childish aspirations. They felt like echoes of a Josh that no longer existed. The elites expected him to walk through life comfortably, perpetuating a dynasty of wealth and status. But did they see the internal conflict that haunted him? No one cared about the shadows lurking behind his designer suits, not the faculty members eager to tout his family's philanthropy, or even the classmates who beamed with envy. Then Josh's fingers grazed something unusual. He pulled it free, a yellowed letter, intricately folded as if holding secrets. His heart raced. With trembling hands, he unfolded it, revealing damning truths about his family's past, of a grievous betrayal against Mary's ancestors. The realization struck him with paralyzing force. His family's fortune was a monument built upon the pain of others. His breath quickened, the room closing in, suffocating him. The words danced in front of his eyes, but he couldn't bring himself to fully absorb them. The tension in his chest was unbearable, torn between his inheritance and the justice he knew was right. Before he could fully process this revelation, a jarring thought clawed at him. How could he stand at a charity gala representing his family's legacy when it was rooted in injustice? The upcoming night loomed ahead, a showcase of his family's charitable works, where he would be expected to smile and accept accolades. But what if he took the stage and spoke the truth? Would his world collapse? The mere notion sent shivers down his spine. He paused, thinking of Mary, how she had raised him alongside her children, instilling values like hard work and integrity. They had shared laughter in this very attic, wrestled with their ambitions and dreams. He understood her struggles more than anyone else did, and it was her unwavering support that fueled his courage. But now, conflicted emotions flared. What kind of man does he become if he chooses to confront the legacy he inherited? The act would not only jeopardize his social standing, but fracture the relationship he had with those he loved. Suddenly, a voice echoed in his mind, sharp and clear. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. Remembering he needed to prepare for the gala clenched his gut tighter. He was at the precipice of revelation, yet every instinct screamed for complacency. The polished faces of the guests in his mind taunted him. They would see a billionaire son, not the conflicted man he felt himself to be. Tension coiled within him as he stood before the gilded doors of the ballroom. Should he uphold his family's empire or shatter the silence that ensnared so many? Facing the podium, a rush of panic surged through him. Time stilled as trepidation flowered in his chest. The anticipation was electric, but he was solely charged with a heavy decision. What would it cost him to unveil the truth? With the letter burning in his pocket, he was on the brink of a confrontation that could irrevocably alter the path of generations. The murmurs subsided, leaving only his beating heart and the echoes of a legacy suffocating his dreams.
Would he ignite a fire of truth that could change everything, or retreat back into the shadows of expectations? The spotlight flooded the ballroom, catching Josh in a web of glittering expectations that flickered like the chandeliers above. The hushed chatter of the guests felt like a sea of pressure closing in around him. His heart raced as he stood motionless behind the podium, his palms slick with sweat. This was the moment he had been preparing for, yet he felt anything but ready. The letter pressed against his thigh, a constant reminder of the truth he had unearthed, a truth that could dismantle the facade his family had built. He glanced out at the crowd, faces framed by designer attire, smiles cultivated from years of privilege. The applause that would soon erupt in honor of his family echoed empty to him. Would they embrace him or vilify him if he dared to speak? Would they even care, or would they dismiss his revelation as a fleeting moment before they returned to their gilded lives? He couldn't shake the feeling that he would be crucified for threatening the comfort they all clung to. "Gentlemen and ladies," he finally began, a tremor in his voice causing the collective anticipation to inhale deeply. "Thank you for being here tonight to celebrate the contributions my family has made." Each word felt like steel rolling off his tongue, heavy and resistant. With every phrase he uttered, Josh dared not lose himself in the manufactured pleasantries that had always been expected of him. "But I must confess,"
He faltered, his breath hitching. A brave fire sparked within him, kindled by the knowledge of the disparities between privilege and oppression. Images of Mary flashed through his mind, the laughter in the attic, her unwavering spirit as she shared her stories. It was her voice that guided him toward honesty. It was for her that he now fought. "I stand before you tonight not merely as a representative of my family's philanthropy, but as a young man reckoning with a legacy not entirely of our own making." The murmurs began, disbelieving, confused. He pressed on, channeling the urgency building inside him, a force that drowned out their skepticism. "I've learned painful truths about the foundations of our fortune, truths that demand recognition and justice for those we've overlooked." In that moment, he turned his gaze to his family, faces flushed with horror or anger. He had crossed an unspoken line, and yet relief washed over him. No longer was he just Josh, the billionaire's son. He was an individual claiming ownership of his voice, ready to confront the shadows that had tainted his family's name. "Too long have we benefited from the stories that were never ours to tell," he continued, his voice gaining steadiness. "We must all be accountable for the legacies we inherit. It's time we acknowledge the pain that paved our way." As words rolled off his tongue, it felt as though each articulation shed layers of his past self that had been suffocating his spirit. Was this the start of his becoming? Each sentence liberated him more from the clutches of expectation. What had begun as nervous terror transformed into a fervent resolve. But as applause erupted, mixed with gasping disbelief, he felt a chilling realization settle in. This was only the beginning. Would his family retaliate? Would his future be irreversibly altered by standing up against a tide of status? As the room reverberated with their divided reactions, he faced the unknown of what lay ahead. Now, standing at the precipice, he understood. The fire he had ignited was one he must stoke, not only for Mary, but for every suppressed voice struggling beneath the weight of injustice. It was not just an act of reclamation, it was a call to arms. With the echoes of his speech still surging through the air, he caught a glimpse of the stunned faces among the guests, some filled with admiration, others with contempt. The path before him was clouded, choices stretching infinitely. How would he navigate the fallout of his truth? The question clung to him as the reality of his defiance set in. His journey into the heart of legacy and justice had begun, but he knew one thing for certain. Embracing who he truly was could unravel everything he had known. How far was he willing to go to forge a new identity amidst the chaos? The room buzzed, electric with mixed reactions. But for Josh, the noise faded into a low hum. He felt untethered, suspended between the familiar
and the unknown. As the applause echoed, it merged with the haunting whispers of doubt in his mind. Had he truly cracked the veneer of his family's carefully curated existence? Or had he just issued an invitation to unprecedented chaos? The applause began to dwindle, revealing tense silence. His mother's glacial stare was enough to chill the warmth from his newfound courage. He could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, strategizing how to reclaim the narrative he had hijacked. He forced himself to focus, pushing that anxiety aside. He couldn't allow his truth to falter beneath her pressure. "Josh," she began, her voice piercing through the murmurs, "this isn't the time for recklessness." Recklessness. He grasped the word, examining it like a foreign object. To her, he was reckless. To him, he was breaking free. "Recklessness is doing nothing at all," he retorted, each syllable steady, embodying a resolve he felt surge through him like a lifeline. The emotional shield built by years of expectation seemed impenetrable, yet this confrontation held the potential to fracture it. A moment of vulnerability flickered on her face, and he seized it. "Mom, it's about accountability. We can't keep pretending. There are lives attached to our legacy." "Do not speak to me of lives, Joshua," she spat, venom dripping from her words. He saw the seething anger swirling beneath her polished exterior, but it only fueled his determination. There was a strength in the turmoil that was beginning to take root within him, something he could nurture instead of flee. He turned and faced the guests, the more sympathetic faces among them stirring a sense of camaraderie. Although many leaned toward them since birth, tonight he craved authenticity. If we are to grow, we must embrace the truth, however uncomfortable. It begins with us. But the applause had shifted into a cacophony of dissent, a chorus of whispers questioning his sanity, and his own resolve wavered momentarily. He had expected resistance, but it was the depths of their disbelief that ensnared him. The privilege they wielded felt tight around him, the very air thickening with implications that weighed heavily on his shoulders. This was no longer just about his family. It was an entire societal structure he dared to confront. In the midst of that pressure, a serious thought crossed his mind. Was he ready for the backlash? With the notion of running from the consequences skimming like a shadow past his consciousness, he swiftly shut the door on it. Retreating to safety was no longer an option. He had a higher purpose that transcended his personal fears. He didn't want to merely carve out a path for his own freedom. He wanted to create space for others. He felt, almost instinctively, that now was the time to carve deeper into this crusade that had set fire to his resolve. His convictions sparked unbidden thoughts about forging alliances among like-minded guests, those who would be willing to champion change alongside him. The evening unraveled before him, each minute transforming into an opportunity to reshape the narrative he had inherited, and he needed a plan. He needed to connect, to rally support that would bolster his ambitions. Who among them shared his vision? As the evening unfolded around him, whispers of dissent became discussions of possibility. He began to weave connections with allegiances in mind, eyeing faces that whispered admiration amid the cacophony. One person catching his eye stood quietly to the side, an unfamiliar figure with unyielding purpose glimmering in their gaze. But just as determination began to grace his features, a sudden realization hit him like a gavel striking wood. The stakes were higher than he'd anticipated. What enemies lay in wait as he marched further into this uncharted territory? He had kindled a flame, yes, but what came next? In that moment of revelation, clarity surged through him. The truth was a catalyst, but it was also a consequence of his actions. What he had ignited could lead to either transformation or ruin. He had crossed a threshold, and now he had to decide whether to focus on the light or confront the darkness it cast. As the guests began to disperse, the weight of his choices settled heavily around him. Would he be able to channel this momentum into real change, or was he simply courting danger? The questions loomed like specters, creeping into his subconscious as the idea of confrontation with his family's legacy began to fray his nerves. The next steps were critical to his quest for authenticity and justice. Determination swelled within him, and with it came the haunting thought: the real fight was only beginning, and only time would reveal the cost of his defiance. Facing the truth had opened the door, but unmasking the complexities waiting behind it was the real battle ahead. Josh stood at the center of the room, the remains of discourse swirling around him like autumn leaves caught in a tempest. Each emotional gust pressed against his chest, and yet within that chaos, something ancient stirred. An awakening of sorts, a pull toward the unfamiliar choices that lay ahead. The taste of defiance lingered on his tongue, mingling with a pang of uncertainty. It had begun. He had ushered in a different existence, one imbued with potential. But the air crackled with trepidation. He had always been adrift, caught in the currents of his family's expectations, but he needed to anchor himself now. Staring out into the faces of the departing guests, he sought out the one figure who had caught his attention. The quiet observer lingered with intent, unthreatening yet strikingly aware. What had drawn them to him? Curiosity? Affinity? He stepped toward them, his heart racing as each footfall brought him closer to a pivotal connection. "Hi," he greeted, trying to infuse warmth into his voice, even as the uncertainty gnawed at him. "I couldn't look away," the stranger replied, their intensity palpable. "What you
Said. It resonated. People like us have been muted for too long." "Us?" he echoed, intrigued yet cautious. The weight of their implication anchored him further. He instinctively yearned to share his burgeoning beliefs with someone who understood. "Those who challenge the norms," they clarified, nodding toward the ebbing crowd with an enigmatic smile. "I admire your honesty." As conversations faded, Josh felt a thrum of purpose entwining with budding hope. He had always known there was darkness to confront, but he hadn't expected the other side would reveal allies adorned in the very fabric of his grandmother's forgotten resilience. "What's your name?" he asked, his pulse quickening with the excitement of discovery. "Lima. And you?" "Josh. So, what do you think comes next?" Her brow furrowed thoughtfully, a reflection of the same inner turbulence he battled. "That depends on how far you're willing to go. Change takes courage, but it also requires allies." The notion struck him hard. Allies! He had forged the first step, but now it was time to figure out how to navigate the chasms ahead. They were not only rising as a collective voice, but also intensifying the very actions that would draw opprobrium from the elite around them. "You're right," Josh said, determination rising within him. "I need to organize this. If we can gather more support, we could turn the noise into a movement. And it can't be just talk. It must result in change." Lena nodded, her enthusiasm palpable. "Exactly. We need to formulate a plan. Let's gather others who share our vision, those who have seen injustice and are ready to speak out." A sudden insecurity flashed through him. Would he be able to lead this charge? Was he prepared for the fallout? But wasn't courage fundamentally intertwined with facing fears head-on? The mere idea invigorated him. The possibility to rewrite not only his legacy, but to interlace the stories of others into something magnificent captured his imagination. "Where do we start?" he asked, his mind adapting quickly to the challenge. "Let's meet again soon, maybe in a quieter space. Lay groundwork for ideas, share experiences. Because, let's face it, the backlash will come, and we need a strategy."
With that, the heaviness Josh initially felt melted into hopeful anticipation. There was no turning back now. He couldn't silence the doubts, but he was growing into a version of himself that wasn't afraid of them. It was no longer about surviving his family's legacy. It was about embracing rebellion, the essential first steps toward authentic existence. As the night concluded and the crowd finally faded, Josh glanced back at Lena, their discussion lingering in his mind like a fresh chapter yet unwritten. For the first time in years, he felt more than just a pawn in a family scheme. He was stepping into a role characterized by agency. But at that moment, just as satisfaction settled momentarily in his heart, a flicker of concern sparked. How deep would the consequences run? What forces would conspire against him?
Them? Enough allies might shield him, but what if betrayal lurked in the shadows of newfound friendships? His path divided before him, filled with uncertainty, yet possibility. It was time to unveil the hidden truths surrounding him, both within himself and his world. As he turned to leave, the enormity of the next step loomed large. Would he find the strength to continue pushing forward, or would the weight of legacy pull him back into its depths? The following days felt like an intricate puzzle unfurling before Josh, each piece sharp with potential, yet daunting in its complexity. The specter of his father's expectations loomed large, often echoing in his mind. But the voice of possibility, ignited by Lena's presence, began to overshadow that familiar weight. This internal struggle propelled him through a restless cycle of planning, reflection, and fear. Each morning he awoke, the sunlight clawing its way through his window, igniting a fire in his belly. He spent hours scrawling ideas in his notebook, visions of gatherings, discussions, brainstorming sessions to weave a tapestry of shared experiences. With every stroke of his pen, he felt tethered to a different version of himself, one brimming with potential rather than stagnation. As days morphed into nights, he and Lena met in dimly lit cafes and libraries, enveloped by the scent of coffee and aged books. They delved into the intricacies of constructing a foundation that could support their ambitions. The weight of the struggle felt monumental, yet every time he looked into her eyes, a spark ignited. Her blueprints of courage became an intoxicating elixir, spurring him on despite the shadows that crept at the edges of their conversations. Yet amidst the rush, self-doubt flickered within Josh, insidious like a predatory animal waiting to pounce. Would others truly rally behind their shared vision, or were they merely two souls drifting in a tempest? The faces of those who would oppose their ambitions played in his mind, an alluring yet terrifying gallery of societal elite unyielding to change. Would he have the authority to inspire without ascending into his family's expansive shadow? One evening he decided to confront this uncertainty. Over coffee, he leaned across the table, his voice tinged with desperation. "Lena, what if we fail? What if all of this work, this drive, ends up crushing us instead of elevating our voices?" She paused, a knowing smile playing on her lips that gradually morphed into a look of steely resolve. Sometimes failure is merely a step toward the next endeavor. The real risk is in silence. You have to decide what narrative you want to write, Josh. Do you want to be a passive observer in your own life? Her words carved through his despair, illuminating a pathway he had yet to explore. Perhaps it wasn't just the desire to create a movement, but the act of asserting his authenticity that mattered most. In that moment, illumination washed over him. He was no longer simply a reluctant participant. He could channel his pain and uncertainty into intention, shaping a vision that extended beyond the wealth and privilege dictated by his lineage. With each strategy they formulated, the undercurrents of resolve surged. Yet, as fresh excitement ignited within him, Josh could not ignore the encroaching shadows of the past. He grappled with the whispers of his father, echoing in his mind, insinuating that the voices challenging the status quo were merely distractions, disruptors to be quashed.
It was a confrontation he knew would come, but hesitating now was not an option. As their plans blossomed, he initiated small gatherings, intimate forums where honest dialogues could unfold. Each voice added to their cause, creating a chorus that bolstered his faltering spirit. They spoke of dreams and desires, puncturing the silence that had long held them captive. He began to see that every person they gathered was not merely a participant, but a thread in the larger fabric of transformation. The resolve within him solidified, but with each passing day, the specter of betrayal loomed closer. With allies arose the potential for discord. Who could he trust wholly, and who might falter when convictions were tested? Then came the day when one of his closest friends, a childhood confidant, invited him to discuss his plans. When he arrived, he could feel the shift in atmosphere, a deliberate tension crackling in the air. The moment of honesty felt at hand, yet uncertainty wafted alongside a hint of trepidation. "Josh, I've been hearing things," his friend started, an edge to his tone. "People are nervous. They think you're diving too deep into something dangerous." As realization cascaded over him, an inkling of betrayal took root in his heart. This was it, the moment he had been both preparing for and dreading. His foundations were set to be tested. Would he bend, or would he stand firm? The room grew heavy with possibility, and as he faced the reality of his choices, the question lingered. What line would he draw, and how far was he truly willing to go? The weight of his friend's words pressed on Josh's chest like a vice, the brewing anxiety morphing into palpable tension that filled the space between them. This was more than mere doubt. It was a harbinger of conflict which had lain dormant but was now awakening. A part of him wanted to flee, to retreat to the safety of familiar shadows, to embrace the notion that perhaps his father's criticisms had merit. But he couldn't ignore the fire ignited by Lena's unwavering belief in him, nor the faces of those who sought change, individuals whose voices needed amplifying. As he searched for his response, a clarity began to form amidst the chaos in his mind. "Dangerous or necessary?" he countered, surprised by his own steadiness. "What we're trying to change is overdue. Maybe it's making people uncomfortable. Maybe it should." His friend's expression softened briefly before doubt crept back in. "I just don't want to see you get hurt, Josh. You don't have to bear this alone. There's a lot at stake." The phrasing struck a nerve. Underneath the guise of camaraderie lay an unspoken acknowledgement of privilege and a tethering to familiar comforts. Josh's heart raced. He realized this encounter felt more like an ultimatum, a test of his mettle that forced him to weigh not just his ambitions, but also the allies he could count on when the tides turned against him. "Believe me, I get it. I grew up with everything handed to me on a silver platter, but this isn't just about me anymore," Josh replied, the fervor in his voice rising. "This is about stepping out of that shadow and exploring who I am outside all that, something you wouldn't understand unless you've lived it." The silence that followed felt suffocating, and he sensed the shift in their friendship based on the conversation's trajectory. Trust, once an unspoken pact, teetered precariously on the edge of honesty. "You can hate the status quo, but if you do this, you'll be inviting scrutiny upon yourself. Just think about the scrutiny you're going to face. Is that really what you want?" Doubt lingered at the fringes of his friend's tone, but they pulsed with genuine concern. He leaned back and took a moment to ground himself, rummaging through his own emotions. The past entangled with his need for validation. The words of his father echoed. Had Josh unwittingly become a puppet, acting against the very fabric of his upbringing? For a moment he hesitated, feeling the weight of his upbringing press against him again. "Sometimes I think the most dangerous place to be is in the silence of complacency," he admitted, his voice now softer, more reflective. "And if I walk away now, what would that say about me? About us?" The air shifted as the undercurrents of their conversation deepened. An unspoken understanding flickered barely as he set the tone of this emerging conflict not just with his friend, but with themselves, as brothers once closely bonded by childhood innocence. I know you care, but I have to go forward. If you're not with me in this, I can't hold back the tide, he said, a mix of determination and sorrow coiling in his gut. They both realized this might be the precipice of a rift, one he never wanted. He felt the gravity of acceptance forming in the pit of his stomach. There was no more room for passive observers in his life. If he was going to forge ahead, he needed to know who would stand beside him. As he stood and prepared to leave, the heavy silence lingered, mirroring the unknown depths they were about to navigate. Questions of loyalty hung in the air, the stakes climbing higher with no guarantee of return. Walking away, Josh sensed a profound transformation had begun, the fragile line of trust irrevocably altered. Ahead lay his father's looming specter, and defeating the chasm between him and his ambitions was not solely
about finding allies. It was also about discovering what stood at the core of his own convictions. With every step, he questioned whether he was ready to embrace the fire of confrontation or if it would consume him entirely. As he stepped into the crisp evening air, soul-shaking realization struck. The true test awaited him not just in external opposition, but in the clarity of his own voice. The time had come to face the truth of his identity, and what that meant would take him to unexpected heights or depths. The coolness of the evening air sharpened Josh's senses, awakening him to an array of possibilities as he walked down the dimly lit street. The cacophony of city life pulsed around him, yet within, all he could hear was the echo of his friends' concerns and his own convictions battling for dominance. Yet there was also something else thrumming beneath that turmoil, a resolute conviction steering him forward. Determined to find clarity, Josh thought of his upcoming meeting with Lena, where they would further discuss their vision for change. It wasn't merely an obligation, it was crucial to his sense of purpose. The flickering neon signs and the night's energy felt charged, as if the universe itself was aligning to amplify his intentions. With each step, he felt the ground firm beneath him, like a base layer of support he'd never before acknowledged. His mind pooled with questions sparked by the earlier exchange. How deep was his commitment to this path? Was he prepared for the inevitable turmoil that would arise? The image of his father, with his dismissive gaze, loomed larger than life in his thoughts, each memory tinged with an unresolved mixture of respect and resentment. No more would he cloak himself in safety or privilege. It was time to confront everything that had kept him from fully embracing who he was destined to become. This wasn't merely personal rebellion, it was a necessary evolution, like shedding the skin of a former self that felt increasingly constrictive. Arriving at the cafe where he often met Lena, Josh took a moment to collect himself, aiming to channel the chaotic energy of the day into focused determination. He recalled their last meeting, filled with radical ideas, confidence, and a flicker of vulnerability, moments vital to both their growth. They were creating something that didn't rely on their respective upbringings, but rather their shared passion for progress. As he entered and spotted Lena deep in thought, the weight of the world seemed buoyed by the light radiating between them. Their conversation easily sparked, igniting the coffee-scented air with shared dreams and aspirations tinged with a sense of urgency. Each idea hit like a drumbeat, a rallying cry resonating within him. But as they exchanged thoughts, he couldn't shake a growing awareness. The underlying fragility of their partnership resonated painfully. A glance at her face told him she was grappling with her own hesitation. Josh leaned in, demanding the space to question. "What are you afraid of, Lena?" She paused, her intensity wavering, then responded, "I want to change things, but the more I think about the risks, the more daunting it feels. I know where we come from, and I sometimes wonder if we're being naive." There it was. The echoed sentiments from his friend resurfaced in a different form. It forced him to confront an unsettling realization. Being a catalyst for necessary change came with more than just creativity and daring ideas. It also required resilience against disapproval and the pursuit of unfathomable courage. Naive?
"No, we're not," he countered fiercely. "We're just not willing to accept that the comforts of complacency will provide any real change. But that's precisely why we cannot falter now. Every act we take can redefine futures beyond our own." In that heated moment, a surge of determination enveloped him. He could indeed redefine his legacy, not as his father's son, but as an architect of change, one who could empower others. But doing that effectively meant first confronting the toughest opponent of all, himself. Lena stared at him, eyes wide, brimming with the emotion of their shared aspirations. Josh sensed a shift, as if both the stakes and the potential impact of their collaboration were solidifying. But just then, a rustle at the door caught his attention, and into the cafe walked a group of familiar faces. Those who had long held positions of influence, their presence unexpected and undeniably intimidating. The temperature in the room dropped palpably. He felt the weight of judgments and expectations soon to be cast upon them. "Looks like our plans are about to get tested," he murmured, adrenaline surging. Josh realized that his confrontation with authority had begun, not just from within, but standing directly before him. The challenge was no longer abstract, it had arrived in flesh and blood. With his heart racing, he turned back to Lena, determined to stand tall against whatever storm lay ahead. They were on the brink of something transformative, and he was ready to meet it head-on. "Let's show them what we're capable of," he stated, each word a silent vow to himself and to her. As he stood shoulder to shoulder with Lena, the reality of the moment solidified in his mind. He was no longer simply a reluctant heir to a legacy he didn't want. Instead, he was becoming the catalyst for a story that could reshape not just his own life, but countless others. The enormity of the shift dawned on him, and just as quickly, he understood that this was merely the beginning. However, the confrontation was more than external. It was the very struggle inside him that would soon resurface, triggering a reckoning he couldn't yet foresee. His resolve shored up against the approaching tide, but the question loomed: would he ultimately rise to the occasion, or would the dismantling of personal demons prove more powerful than he anticipated? The group's presence loomed large, their collective aura thick with authority as they fanned out. Across the cafe, Josh's pulse quickened. He was no longer just navigating a conversation with a peer, but standing at the precipice of his own convictions. His earlier bravado felt delicate now, vibrating like a taut string ready to snap under pressure. Glancing at Lena, he caught her gaze, her earlier uncertainty reflected in her wide eyes. This was the moment to reshape not only their mission, but also their self-perception. As their shoulders brushed, he felt the unspoken agreement rise between them. They would confront this challenge together. Fight or flight, they had chosen to fight. "Keep it light," he whispered to Lena, his pulse beginning to steady. "We need to seem confident." The group's leader, a well-dressed man with an undeniable air of authority, approached the duo like a hawk circling its prey. His eyes narrowed, gauging them, and Josh could almost hear the unspoken judgment flood into their discussion. "Fancy meeting you both here," the man said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I do hope your ambitions have been tempered by reality." Josh felt the sting of those words cut into his resolve like a knife. He knew he needed to respond not only with intellect, but with courage to shatter the confidence of that patronizing tone. "Reality is precisely why we must act," he retorted, surprising even himself with the steel in his voice. The man cocked an eyebrow, bemused, yet Josh registered the cracks in his armor. "And what is that reality, exactly? That you'll champion changes that nobody has ever deemed necessary? Let's be realistic. People thrive in familiarity." The notion clawed at Josh's insides. Far too familiar was the idea that being comfortable equated to being well off. but he had tasted the dissatisfaction that lay beneath the surface of complacency. "Familiarity breeds stagnation," he snapped back, bolstered by a burgeoning conviction. "To enact genuine change, we must be uncomfortable. The world won't transform on its own." He felt Lena's fingers tighten around his wrist, grounding him as if bolstering his resolve. The man recoiled slightly, perhaps sensing the tide turning. But this only marked the beginning of their confrontation. It was now or never, and Josh felt an electric charge of possibility. The initial exchanges morphed into a dialogue, but with each response, vines of skepticism attempted to worm their way back into his mind. Was he merely trading barbs? Did he truly believe in the foundations they were trying to build? Or was this bravado an elaborate facade? "Tell me something, Josh," the man challenged, his tone shifting to an inquisitive sneer. "What if your path leads you down a road of failure? Can you handle that? Can you truly embrace being a failure instead of that revered heir?" His casual dismissal scraped against Josh's self-image. A deep, visceral rage simmered beneath the surface, one that poked holes in every reservation he harbored about disappointing his father. But he also felt a flicker of clarity emerge from that anguish. He didn't want to follow anyone's footsteps, much less those predicated on legacy alone. "Failure is merely a bridge to success," Lena interrupted, her voice steady and unwavering, harmonizing with Josh's restless spirit. "What's to fear in confronting the unknown? Isn't the absence of risk the real failure?" Suddenly, the tension in the air felt palpable. They were no longer just countering an external threat, but reckoning with their unique identities. For a moment, Josh realized he wasn't afraid of failure because it had nothing to do with destinies dictated by family names. It was about the actions they chose, the paths they forged. But just as the atmosphere surged with promise, the door rattled again as another figure entered, one that sent an echoed chill through the cafe. Josh's heart sank as he recognized the silhouette, his father, dressed impeccably like a king of corporate America, eyeing the scene. This was the ultimate challenge, the culmination of all that had brought him here. "Dad, what are you doing here?" The question spilled from him, turbulent and piercing. "Just observing," his father replied, ice in his tone, "and wondering when you're going to grow up." Josh's mind spun, the stakes heightening to unimaginable levels. The very real fear of disappointing his father gripped his heart like a vice, squeezing around the light he had just begun to see. The dawning of clarity mingled with uncertainty. This wasn't merely a public confrontation, it was a familial reckoning. He realized the fabric of his burgeoning identity was ripping apart as the strands of expectation and ambition collided violently. Was he truly prepared to disrupt this narrative, to step fully into the unknown, ready to ignite his path? The answer faced him like a mirror, reflecting not just the man he feared to disappoint, but the potential for who he really wanted to be. As tension surged, one thing became undeniable. Arm or not, this confrontation would shatter illusions and test the very core of his tenacity. Would he break under pressure, or seize the moment to define himself once and for all? The air felt heavy, charged with an unspeakable tension as Josh faced his father, whose presence dominated not only the cafe, but every anxious thought swirling in his mind. The words he had chosen to stand by hung in the air, but the intellectual armor he had donned began to feel flimsy, almost suffocating. He could feel Lena's steady presence beside him, a reminder of the ground he hoped to stand on, but the reality of the situation was slipping through his fingers like sand. Grow up? Josh could barely contain the outrage roiling inside him. It wasn't the first time his father's harsh critiques have cut deep, but this time was different. This time it was about more than himself. It was the future they had discussed, the ideals he and Lena had ignited amidst uncertainty and fear. "In what way do you mean? By following your footsteps into a life I don't want?" His father, immovable as a mountain, regarded him with an expression that blended disappointment and disdain. "Your idealism is charming but naive.
The world isn't kind to those who dare to think differently. It rewards pragmatism, strategy, results. But what good is a result if it doesn't reflect who we truly are? A tremor of doubt lingered in Josh's voice, but the conviction remained strong enough to push through. I'm not asking for permission to live life on my terms just to avoid discomfort. I'm ready to embrace uncertainty. His father laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Embrace uncertainty? You think that's an option? I know what ambition looks like, and it doesn't wear rose-colored glasses. If you want to risk everything, you'll do so without the safety net I've provided. Josh's heart raced, both from the battle of words and the realization that for too long he had clung to the safety of his father's approval. This was the pivotal moment. He longed for clarity, for authenticity, but could he truly reject the very foundation upon which he had built his identity? Maybe your reality needs to shift. Lena's voice broke through the fray, rich with defiance. You define your success by metrics that matter to you, but fail to see the necessity for evolution. Josh is choosing to be bold instead of compliant, and that's strength, not weakness. Josh felt a surge of appreciation for her words, igniting warmth within him, yet faced the prospect of simultaneous fallout. What would his father think of them both? But this was also a moment for revelation. The man's eyes flickered between surprise and anger, a crack in his authoritative facade. Uncertainty still permeated Josh's core, mixing with the strength he was summoning. He had questions spiraling inside of him, each one more unsettling than the last. Who was he when stripped of familial expectations? What did success mean if it didn't align with his beliefs? Those thoughts amplified his resolve, revealing layers of himself he had rarely allowed himself to confront. What if this confrontation was not merely about changing his trajectory, but also about defining it on his own terms? He could feel it welling up within him, demanding expression. You taught me that responsibility extends beyond oneself. But what if it is also my responsibility to question the status quo? Josh's voice had gained depth, a steadying influence. His father's gaze faltered for the first time, an imperceptible shift that felt monumental, echoing even louder than any applause might. Do you think you truly understand what you're challenging? His father's voice was low, devoid of the usual sternness. That's just it, Dad, Josh replied, every word gaining clarity, revealing the hidden truths he would rather confront than silence. And if that means embracing fear and possibly failure, then I must do so. I can't live in a shadow anymore. In that moment, the air changed. The weight of expectations was no longer just an anchor, but a double-edged sword. He was no longer just the heir to a legacy, but his own man. As his father's eyes narrowed, an internal war unfolded, a mixture of admiration and resentment swirling behind a mask of corporate pride. Josh took a breath, feeling grounded in this narrative reshaping itself before him. You may not support me, but I will rise or fall on my own terms. I won't apologize for wanting more from myself or the world. And with that comes the radical possibility of failure. The aftermath of his declaration sunk into the silence of the cafe. Uncertainty and fear morphed into a palpable pulse of challenge hanging in the air. In this fractious realm, amidst the bitter thrill of confrontation, something had shifted. Josh knew he would either become a man forged from adversity or a hesitant shadow cast by his father. As anxiety swelled within him, he wondered, was this the beginning of true independence, or had he just ignited a flame that could lead to devastating consequences? The potential to reshape his identity was profound, but the path forward lay obscured behind the fog of defiance. All that existed was a subtle tension, a question marking the horizon of his journey. What would he ultimately discover about himself in the darkness that awaited? The aftermath of his confrontation with his father hung in the air like a suspended note, a chord that had been struck but not yet resolved. Josh stepped outside the cafe, the cool night air brushing against his skin, invigorating and chilling all at once. Each breath filled him with a rush of adrenaline, and for the first time, he felt a semblance of control unfurling within him. The clarity that dawned in the moments after his father had challenged him was profound. Josh was not merely standing up for himself, he was carving out a new narrative that defined the essence of who he was set to become. No longer a reluctant participant in his family's legacy, he was stepping into the arena with intention, ready to build a future on truths he had unearthed. The truths that demanded recognition and accountability. As he walked through the shadowy streets of New York, the dazzling lights of the city blurring past him, he envisioned the gatherings he had hosted. He could see the faces of kindred spirits, alongside Lena, who were ready to challenge the status quo. The collective synergy of their voices inspired him to push deeper into this rebellion against silence. The anticipation of what lay ahead ignited something fiery within him. That night marked a definitive turning point. Days later, he organized an open forum, inviting others beyond the privileged few he usually mingled with. Individuals from varied backgrounds whose voices had been silenced for far too long. The turnout exceeded his expectations, a testament to the urgency of their shared experience. Each participant brought distinct stories that wove into a rich tapestry of injustice and resilience. It was as if, through their collective will, they were becoming a force that could no longer be ignored. Josh took to the podium, a blend of nervousness and fierce determination pumping through his veins. In that moment, he was not simply speaking to a crowd, he was ushering in an awakening. The words flowed effortlessly, buoyed by the conviction that grew stronger with each passing moment. Together, we must challenge the systems that perpetuate inequality. We are here not as mere observers, but as agents of change, willing to confront our own histories while paving the way for justice. In the audience, he recognized faces that mirrored his own anguish, excitement, and resolve. They hungered for transformation, and his presence was a reminder that their struggles were not in vain. The shift that had begun within him was manifesting outward, radiating energy and hope. Months passed, and as each gathering unfolded, the network of advocates began to solidify. The course of their movements evolved from quiet discussions in back rooms to vibrant, organized efforts demanding justice in the streets, igniting a broader dialogue throughout the city. His spirit soared, not only from the external successes, but because he was witnessing his evolution. A man who had once been a reluctant son, now blossoming as a courageous leader, unafraid to confront uncomfortable truths. It was on a particularly brisk autumn evening, while preparing for another gathering, that recognition came in a way he had not anticipated. An invitation to speak at a prestigious community leadership event arrived in his inbox. The prospect of being acknowledged in a space previously reserved for the elite sent shockwaves of disbelief and excitement coursing through him. This was validation, a recognition of the transformation he had achieved. Standing in front of the audience at the event, the weight of his journey settled upon his shoulders. He addressed not only those in power, but the vast network of individuals who had stood by him through this tumultuous time. I stand before you not just as a man with familiar entitlements, but as an individual who learned how to reclaim responsibility for the stories we inherit. Change doesn't require defeating our pasts. It involves understanding and reshaping them into something new. As applause erupted and resonated around the auditorium, he felt the strength of not only individual but collective growth. A deep-seated sense of belonging and purpose reaffirmed by shared conviction. Recognition was no longer about prestige. It was about amplifying stories that mattered. In that moment of ultimate realization, he embraced the magnitude of his own transformation. Having conquered internal doubt and external pressures, Josh now carried himself with solid confidence and established competence.
His role shifted. He was no longer just the son of a billionaire. He was an advocate for social justice, armed with purpose and a commitment to change. That evening, after the applause faded and the camera snapped their final shots, Josh received an unexpected message from Mary. The elderly woman with whom he had shared countless memories had always been a guiding light. "You've done well."
Josh, never lose sight of who you truly are. Your courage is a testament to the power of love and accountability. Keep blazing your trail. Her words filled him with profound gratitude as he stepped into a new phase of his life, one marked by determination to champion the voices around him. Embracing the power of transformation, Josh realized he was no longer just writing his own legacy. He was envisioning a future where change reverberated far beyond the gilded walls of privilege. This was his moment of triumph, one earned through grit, conviction, and an unwavering commitment to righteousness that would undoubtedly echo through generations. You need to subscribe now so you won't miss more inspiring stories of personal overcoming. This is the moment to show your support. Leave a like now to make a difference. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion, and comment your reactions and theories about the ending.